Hello and welcome to today's Northern Slant Hosts with me, Roger Greer. Today I'm joined by former MLA, former Deputy Leader of the Ulster Unionist Party and of NI21, now leading the land mobility programme at Ulster Farmers Union and Young Farmers Club and board member of the Community Relations Council, John McCallister. Thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure, Roger.
Great to speak to you. Yours has been one of the more interesting political careers in Northern Ireland, and you seem a very reasonable and normal person. What on earth led you to politics?
That's maybe that's too normal, the way it all cut short or something, you know.
Yeah.
I suppose probably like a lot of people, I grew up through the Troubles, but I had a huge interest in politics growing up and just watching what was happening, and even from a young age watching election coverage and stuff like that, and watching Mrs. Thatcher cruising to a second term and then a third term, and almost being shocked in 1990 when she changed to John Major. That was the first time I could actually recall in my living memory that happening. It seemed like she'd been there forever. A huge interest in politics and the way it was developing and evolving, and always wanted to do something. But primarily, I suppose, like most people, it might always sound, very tried and tested, I wanted to give something back to the community. I wanted to be able to help solve problems rather than, necessarily be the problem. I wanted to be part of solving problems, helping constituents. It was always surprising that the letters MLA after your name could actually open many doors and get things moving and start problems being looked at that had sat on an inbox somewhere. Yeah. And that was the motivation for me, pure and simple, was I thought I'd something to contribute, and I wanted to try and do that and to help and to serve.
Yeah. And why the UUP? Was it just a natural fit at that time?
It was totally a natural fit. Very much, growing up, through the 1980s, watching, obviously the late Dr. Paisley in full flow at that time as an MP, an MEP, and it was very much, I didn't sit easy with me, that sort of mix of politics and religion, and I was very much a natural, I suppose, Ulster Unionist, and probably particularly actually when David Trimble was elected leader. And I wouldn't have been a natural supporter. I was, can tell you, and I'm sure I've said to David himself, but probably the day he was elected leader, I was a bit despairing, because we'd come back off the summer of him and Paisley walking down at Drumcree, and I thought, no, really, this isn't what we need. But I realised that maybe helped him win the leadership in 1995. I voted very enthusiastically for the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, and I've never changed my mind. We're just shy of 23 years. Yeah. So by 1998, the Ulster Unions was very much my natural fit. When I first voted, I was voting for the Ulster Unionist Party, and had consistently voted. It's probably slightly sad even now. I would desperately love to be able to vote for the Ulster Unionist Party, but probably just don't feel it quite represents me or where I'm at. I wish that wasn't so, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I'll touch on that a little bit later, but you were elected to the Assembly in 2007, and I suppose the circumstances are slightly different with restored power, but similar in that we've got an assembly now that we didn't have prior to that. I'd imagine Belfast Festival a couple of years ago, for the Northern Slant, you'd said that one of the important things at that time when the assembly was out of office and there was no executive, was that psychologically, just speaking to your colleagues from across the house, asking them how they were and how their families were, was a really important bit of just that process of governing. What are your memories from back whenever you were first elected, and did you feel like it was like that? It was good just to be able to speak to colleagues and get to know them personally, and that helps along the process?
Absolutely. You know, it's a key part of it. And look, we're 10 months now into a lockdown where people are working from home, and yes, many people are enjoying that, and we may not ever work fully back in an office environment again, but I certainly think we will have a much more blended approach. We still, as individuals, as people, we still crave to see other people, and whether it's you and I chatting, over a cup of tea in the canteen, or standing waiting for the office printer to work, or whatever it happens to be, you get to know people. So that was hugely important. When I went in 2007, so in March 2007 election was really held in the back of the St Andrews Agreement at the end of 2006. Sinn Féin had started to go onto the policing board, cleared the way for the election, and the opportunity came up. Dermot Nesbitt, my predecessor, wasn't standing. I, toyed with the idea of putting my hat in for selection, not really expecting to get it, but thinking, look, you could wait years for a chance like this to come round again. So got selected, and ultimately got elected. I mean, it's quite a strange feeling walking or driving up to Stormont the first time, and you stop the security. Well, actually, and so suddenly it changes to sir, and that's that and the other, and you're going, look, John's fine, really. But and you go up on the day, and when I arrived up and started to find my way around, we didn't know whether power was actually going to be restored. There was still a huge bet that Paisley would never do that. That would never get it over the line. Could the DUP sell this to the base? So you're elected a new member, but you don't actually know, will this thing collapse? Will it run the course? And then so I was elected on the 7th of March. The end of March, Paisley and Adams had their first face-to-face meeting in the members' dining room, and the tables sat at an angle to each other, so to keep all the optics right. And on the 8th of May, power was devolved back to the Northern Ireland Assembly. And I mean, even being there that day, as you looked around, and a glittering array of who's who from politics, and there's little old me, newly elected member, in the middle of it. And at one point in the Great Hall in Stormont, I turned round, and suddenly there's Tony Blair standing in front of him, and I'm shaking hands with the Prime Minister, and I'm still chatting to him. I can feel a message going off on my phone, and when I checked it later, it was somebody said, just joking, after I'd seen the live coverage of me speaking to the Prime Minister, and nearly telling me I'd need to wash my hands after that or something. But it was, and people like the late Senator Edward Kennedy, had travelled over, and to meet somebody like that, John Reid, who'd been Secretary of State and Home Secretary, there was just a glittering array. And I suppose it did strike me, as somebody who was born, in February 1972, in the worst year of the Troubles, and struck me as I watched, the late Ian Paisley and the late Martin McGuinness come down the stairs with Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern, it did strike me, the one question was, what was it all for? You know, where could we not have done this in 1972, 73? You know, my generation wouldn't have had to grow up in what we grew up in fact, make it into our early 20s before the ceasefires would kick in. But still, there was an overwhelming sense of relief that here we were.
Yeah, and you took those steps from MLA and committee into standing for the leadership, and against Mike Nesbitt, who won the leadership and appointed you deputy, but then removed you from that position when you made a speech about unionism Ulster Unionism sleepwalking into unionist unity. Did it surprise you how much you and the party grew apart during that time, right up onto that point when you quit over actual agreed unionist unity?
Yes, it did. I mean, I was appointed deputy leader by Tom initially, Tom Elliott, and so I'd been deputy about 18 months. And though Tom and I probably not in political terms like a natural fit, in the sense that I'm very much seen as a very liberal unionist, Tom fairly traditional, but Tom and I had a very good working relationship. You know, if either of us had something to say to one another, if we said it, you know, you
do seem like two straight talking sort of men.
You know, and hence, you know, and I was very fond of Tom. I still occasionally have him in the Wild West. I give him a shout and maybe make him buy me a cup of tea or something, and then a skilling. But and then we went through, you know, through the leadership election. I have to say it was one of the most fun election campaigns I really ever had. And I felt, and probably still feel to this day, that I'd very much, you know, won all the battles but lost the war, and lost it significantly. I mean, Mike, you know, not lost up. Mike had what, an 80, you know, I couldn't even hold it to full 20%. I think I was at 19 point something percent to Mike's, you know, just short of 81%. So overwhelming victory. And I probably knew that had I won, I needed to really, the party needed to look and feel different. It needed, you know, we just couldn't do more of the same. And I really had thought, and you'll hear a lot of it from Wednesday on about Joe Biden's first 100 days. I really thought, roughly from the end of March, the leadership election was the 31st of March, and you had through roughly 100 days was going to take you to summer recess, thereabouts. So I thought you really need to hit the ground running. And I was probably at that point then, as we went through April, May, June, I was quite depressed that I didn't see anything happening or changing. You know, I did feel that Mike had the chance to appoint a party chairman. He appointed, you know, one of his predecessors, Ray Jempe, and he appointed Tom back on the party officer team. And I did think, yes, nothing quite says change like bringing back regard. You know, and that's fine. That was his prerogative to do. He kept me on as party leader or party deputy leader, but I never felt in the next 6 months that it was, you know, really up to much, you know, in the sense that I was involved in very, very little. But then I suppose I did my speech. Mike, you know, was really annoyed that I'd used the phrase sleepwalking into unity, and he said there was no plans to do anything. And I said the perceptions there, but it was that phrase that really annoyed him. Out of, you know, a 20-minute speech. It was that one line, as they say, that one line, what did it?
Yeah.
So the following day, I did a bit for Inside Politics, and again, I made that point to Mark Davenport that, look, that was what this was just warning about, the dangers. And then, but I got a message from Mike to come and see him the next morning, and at that point I knew I was going to be fired, and there was nothing else for it, only take Jane and the kids for an ice cream, on a Sunday afternoon when you're going to be fired the next day. I just thought we were in the wrong place. Then the flags protest was kicking off, and we seemed to get bogged into things like, when there was suggestions from people like Edwin Poots and other DUP members about doing, with the numbers to put the flag up 365 days. And I remember seeking assurances from Mike Nesbitt about, are we going to, I think it was Leslie Cree was our man, the commission at the time, I don't want to go down this road.
Yeah, polarization.
Polarization, and it just wasn't for me. Does the flag offend me? Of course not. The flag it does offend me when I see it flown badly or upside down or in tatters, but that's a slightly different issue.
Yeah.
So we went on through that autumn and winter, and we were wrecking Belfast and wrecking our economy and our image abroad, and really shaking the institutions to their very core. And then we come up with a brilliant idea that we'd form a unionist forum and bring all unionists together to talk to each other.
I don't think there was very much talking that went on as part of that forum, though, was there?
No, there was. To my understanding, there was very little talking went on. But again, the image went in that here's unionism circling the wagons again, with no set agenda or no outcome. And the one thing that kept coming up, the one theme was things like the difficulties in Protestant working class communities. And I would have made the point to some people that, oddly, if that was your issue about educational underachievement in Protestant working classes, probably Martin McGuinness's door would have been as easy to push open and get support in funding programs and real interventions that could help make a difference in areas like that. But instead we were tearing the place apart and demanding the flag go back up at City Hall and indeed at Stormont in every day of the year. And I made it clear to the party that I didn't, and happy with designated days, but I wasn't going to a 365 day flying the flag. And that was, so as we went through January, it became obvious I was sort of like, every time I even moved in my chair, what's wrong with him now, and it was becoming. And then I suppose the straw that broke the camel's back, I could see it coming right back from June the previous year.
Yeah.
It was fairly open that Martin McGuinness was going to stand down as the Mid-Ulster MP. And that was up to him. I was asked as far back as June as to what I thought, and I said, well, to me it's perfectly obvious. We run Sandra Overend. Sandra loyally tramps around the constituency, visits the faithful, gathers up a list of constituency jobs to do and roads to fix and signs to replace and all the things. Exactly what I had done in my 2010 Conservative You Comf election.
The famously named You Comf.
The famously named You Comf. Toured around Southdown, met the faithful, shook a few hands, drank a few cups of tea, all of that, and had too many buns, and got a list of things to do, and got reassured that, look, we'll be with you next year. The bit I thought and still think was it was a completely wrong image for the party to create, you know, that you were doing a unity candidate. Here you were at various elections in the past, cutting the lining out of the DUP, and now we were saying go and vote for our unity candidate. Mike and Peter out, you know, eating an ice cream together, looking as comfortable as Blair and Brown. But, you know, and then when you announced it, and that, so I knew that week, even from the team meeting on the Monday, where Mike had said something, look, if this comes off, I think his phrase was something that's potentially could be very exciting. And I was thinking, oh no, they're going to do a unity candidate. Yeah. So I started chipping away at a resignation letter. And I mean, I talked it over at home, and I knew that I could well be, in political terms, signing my own death warrant, you know, that this was a political career over. So I knew that, you know, I was very cognizant of how serious a decision this was, but I just didn't want to stay on.
Yeah, and you famously signed that death warrant on live TV after the results.
Yes, no, it was the day it was announced.
Yeah, it was all that evening, wasn't it?
It was, well, I can tell you the date of it because I was at home and I threw a very quick romantic dinner. It was St. Valentine's Day.
Oh, was it?
2013. And I was due to be on The View to talk about health and one of my interests in long-term care and how we fund long-term care, and the Cameron government had published the Dillnut report and stuff like that, and we really didn't have a debate here about how we would fund it or look at it or take it seriously. So I was due to be on to talk about that, and then I pushed the button on the other. Yeah. I did ring to tell him, and I told him, and then I emailed him my letter, and then that was me. I resigned on live television on BBC's The View. You know,
that was that. And then you after that joined or formed NI21 with Basil McRae. And I sort of watched in 2018, 2019 when Change UK or the independent group, TIG, or the Independent Group for Change, or whatever way they decided to name themselves at the end of it, were formed in the UK. And remember back to NI21 and how difficult it was to form a wholly new party, because you're up against everybody. And it seemed that you were up against everybody, including those who up until very recently were completely on your side, or at least nominally on your side. Did you think it would be that hard?
I knew it would. I suppose I knew it was going to be really difficult, because you're trying to do lots of things plus continuing to do your day job, if you like. Yeah. You're wanting to, so you're still having to represent your constituents in the assembly. You're still having to attend lots of constituency events, and you're now trying to build some type of political party, movement, whatever you want to call it. You know, it was fun and was exciting, you know, doing that. But the one advantage we would have had, and this applies, I think, to Change UK, which I was sort of amused that one of the names that I had sort of toyed about with before NI21 name come up was actually Change NI or Reform NI. So and I'd about Change NI, Reform maybe sounds too much like some right wing, you know, a hard right thing. But it was that was, you know, so you could have Change NI and Change UK. I suspect they encountered one of the same difficulties. They went, instead of using the newness to tighter define what it is you're about, they opened it up to too broad a base. And we, Basil was much more into just numbers rather than, maybe speaking to people and somebody going, for example, one guy that was in NI 21 is now a member of the Communist Party of Ireland. Well, like, you go, on what planet do you mix those two political traditions? So that was where I think it went. But it was exciting doing.
Yeah, you had quite a bit of momentum as well. I mean, you had a good candidate for the Europeans in Tina McKenzie, and it seemed to have a bit of spark about it. But I suppose to end the way that it did, not in an out, due to a lot of dysfunction as well as political defeat, was that a huge disappointment?
It was a huge disappointment, but also by the time the end came, it was relief just to be
really?
Quite frankly, I just wasn't. I mean, probably if I was charting NI 21, we had a few meetings in the April and putting a bit of the bones. I would have drafted most of what are we about, what it is we want this party to be about, and then we'd the launch in the 6th of June. 2013 D-Day, of all days, and I would probably say the high water mark of NI 21 was the party conference. The main things we were championing that day were, right, we need to reform Stormont and make our executive and assembly functional. So we can't make the party function, but the executive function. So we were elected a party executive, but the main themes for the wider public were you reform Stormont and make it functional, and then you start and look about devolving tax varying powers. And this was an exciting message for a pro-union party to become and say, no, we should devolve tax varying powers. This was traditionally seen as something that SDLP and Sinn Féin would have called for, but no self-respecting unionist wanted to do this, whereas actually we were going, no, we need a much clearer link between what's money you spent and what money you raised. We were very much at the forefront of a party saying, bear in mind our conference was November 13th, so 10 months before the Scottish independence referendum.
Yeah.
And we were very much saying, look, whatever happens next September, the nature of devolution is going to change. Now, I hope Scotland very much stay in the Union, as they did, but the nature of it's going to change and much more power. Whatever happens, they will end up with more power. That will be quite, part of the settlement deal. And we needed to move much beyond this idea that, we just need more money from Westminster to solve all our ills, more money. We need to start thinking about policy and ideas. And we'd also put out the drawing a line in the past, which was a difficult message to sell. But we had a really good day. We had an Irish government minister in the form of Brian Hayes up, and he was, a number 2 in their Department of Finance, talking about tax, very much making the point, with small changes you can drive different behaviour. And this was the sort of stuff that I thought was a really important message to get out there. That to me was the high watermark. And even for a week after our conference, we'd comments from the finance minister, who was Simon Hamilton at the time, and the First Minister, Peter Robinson, still, in the news and making headlines, which, was exactly what you want. Even they're having a go at you, it's exactly what you want to have set an agenda. And that to me was the high point of NI 21. And then we hit the skids. After that, we went, by the time February 2014 had come, there was the on the runs letters. And here was a party that wanted to draw a line in the past was suddenly given commentary about on the runs, and we gave a position on the Wednesday when that story broke, changed it on the Thursday. We're back to Wednesday's position by the Friday, and we're in Thursday's position by the Monday. And by Tuesday, I didn't know where we were. And that was mainly, you know, owing to Basil seemed to want to be on the news, you know, on that. And I was saying this, you know, this isn't the demographic of where an NI21 voter is. It's not one that we need to be involved in. I mean, it did cement my view that whatever you're doing with the past, you need to do it across the board. You know, if you draw a line in the past, draw it, but you draw it for everybody. You know, Republican, British Army, RUC, you draw the line, but you don't give letters to one or make a stay in prosecution for somebody else. But that a sort of aside. But it took Peter and I to April to sort of persuade Basil that we were in the wrong place. And then by April, we were into whatever allegations had been thrown at Basil. We were into a care call investigation, then it was stopped. Then we were into Douglas Bean, the Standards Commissioner, looking at it. And yes, you know, at the end of it, Basil was cleared by the Commission. There was some criticism from the Committee of Standards Privileges about behaviour falling short, but there was those issues. You know, an NI21, just as a new entity, wasn't able to deal or had no way of dealing or answering. And look, it would have been easier for me, and I suspect I might have been electorally more successful in 2016 had I stayed just as an independent and tried to do something like Claire Sugden is, you know, built a wonderful reputation in East Londonderry. But I never regret doing NI21, because even as recently as when we were last able to go out somewhere, you know,
feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, it does. Yes, it does. But say, you know, 5.5 years after NI21, someone walked up to me in a bar and said, "Oh, you're the guy from NI21. I thought what you were doing was amazing." And I said, "Well, thank you, you know, because for a brief time in 2013, we saw a nice bright light as to what normal in Northern Ireland might look like. You know, what would a normal Northern Ireland look like?" And you know, we did all of those things, and I just think, you know, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that unionism needs, you know, needs an NI21. Probably even the tragedy is that, while I'm quite sure the Ulster Unionist Party and many members had a good old chuckle at Basil and I, you know, falling out, falling apart, and all of NI21, they should have looked and said, well, the lads were onto something.
Yeah.
They needed. And I'm not saying that the Ulster Unionist Party could ever been as liberal as NI21, but they needed to look and say, there's some of those clothes we should re-engage with and put back on again. They're fundamentally where we should be. And particularly over things that come up afterwards, like the Brexit debate, you know, having a unionist, a pro-union party that was very firmly in the pro-Remain camp, I think would have been an important dynamic.
Yeah, and I suppose looking at the centenary coming around the corner. Sorry, I was going to say, looking at the centenary coming around the corner, and unionism is still in that challenging place. And you mentioned Brexit, but there's been strategic and tactical challenges that unionism sort of faced and failed over the last few years. Loss of majority of unionism at Stormont, and more calls for United Ireland. And I suppose the wheels haven't fallen off unionism, but we're in need of a really good service. How should with the failures of NI21, but the failure of unionism to pick up those middle ground and the gains that Alliance have made, how should unionism use that centenary commemoration to sort of claw back some of the initiative? What could they do?
I think they probably need in a positive light much more to be out, speaking about the benefits of the union, not even talking about a United Ireland as if it's some sort of fait accompli, but actually talking about the benefits of the union and making the union a place of welcoming for everyone. Unionism is an awful habit of even saying that, oh, well, you're really an alliance type anyway, so why don't you just, clear off and go to the alliance? And so many people, like if you look at the city of Belfast, I think in someone told you, even back when I was first elected, never mind maybe 10 years before that the Green Party would poll more in Belfast than the Ulster Unionist Party. You would have been absolutely shocked. I mean, the Ulster Unionist Party is down to 2 council seats in Belfast. So I think it needs to be a much more positive engagement with people. They need to make it much better at speaking to people other than just themselves. As I said earlier, I desperately want to vote for the Ulster Unionist Party, but I'm not clear on what they're about and that they're appealing to me. I know it is, an old cliche, but I do strongly feel that the party left me rather than me leaving the party. I feel they moved on to a different ground. Yes, they were in theory, Mike Nesbitt was a pro-Remain voter and campaigned for that, but Robin Swan was a Brexiteer. You'd no clear message that they were really, or sense that they were really clear pro-Remain party. When it came to the European vote in May of 2019, I had no idea what the UUP wanted to do. So here I'm desperately wanting to vote for the UUP, but having to vote for Alliance. And the same when, say, Theresa May's deal came around, should the Ulster Unionist Party not have backed that? And here we've ended up where we are. And I just don't get a sense that they're putting a message out to sell. Always one of my big things about unionist unity was it decreased the circle of voters that you're appealing to. With this idea that if you put out a Christian orange man who was a victim, we'd hit the Holy Grail in candidates, and that all the faithful, if you had anything about you, you'll have to come out and vote for it. And stop doing that, because unity always involves unifying around the head-banging wing of unionism. There's nobody ever says let's unify around liberal unionists like John, or there's nobody does that, because nobody comes out and says, or where unionism was on equal marriage or on termination of pregnancy. We just weren't, instead of doing a deal or compromising on some of those issues, if arguably if the Assembly and unionism had compromised on things like termination of pregnancy, around fatal fetal abnormality and sexual crimes, rape, there's every likelihood that would have been settled and not have needed for the Human Rights Commission to challenge that in a court action, the UK Supreme Court. So you've all of those things, and by the time even we got to equal marriage, and to Mike's credit, he did warn at one stage that we were in danger of being on the wrong side of history. But by that stage, we'd equal marriage in Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland. And here was Northern Ireland fighting the good fight against civil equal marriage. I mean, it made no sense at all. So stop putting off voters, stop limiting who you think can be labelled as a unionist or pro-union. Start trying to make the tent bigger and wider, so people, look at the Scottish model when they were fighting the Indy 1 referendum, that arguably Gordon Brown made a massive contribution, even though the Prime Minister he helped to save was the person who beat him, 4 years earlier. So you brought all those pro-union parties together, and we've managed to put off people and chase them into Alliance and Green. And not that everybody's that excited about either Alliance or Green or whatever, but we're making it very difficult at times to vote for traditional unionist parties, and that's something that I'm no doubt there's still a huge margin pro-union are happy with the status quo, but we need to lift our political game and make the argument for the union and give people a reason to vote. And probably comes back to something quite simple. Too often unionism's associated with, the answer is no, Roger. Now, what was your question?
Yeah.
We need to be a bit more positive. Yes. And even there's a but there, but actually, yes, and engage with people, not be afraid to engage with people. The union's a great message to sell, so get out and sell it.
Yeah, when you were an independent MLA and you were sitting in that naughty corner, but it was actually a very productive corner. Stephen Agnew brought through
the naughty corner.
Stephen Agnew brought through the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. Jim Allister had a SPAD bill. You had the opposition bill. And I was speaking to Colin McDevitt a few weeks ago on this series, and he was saying that backbench MLAs have a huge amount of power to do things when they actually put their mind to it, and that little corner showed that. And the opposition bill had a potential to change hugely the way Northern Ireland works as a government. Did the smaller parties fail first time round, or are we just maybe not ready for that type of normal-ish politics yet?
No, I don't think they did fail. I suppose that's where our normal is. In straight normal politics, and you're somebody that has a huge interest in studying politics. In normal politics, if you brought down a government, if the opposition brought down a government, you would be lauded as a great success, which they did. And there was no doubt whatsoever that the two main parties hated being in government alone without big leaf of political cover of SDLP and Ulster Unionists or Alliance. So that end of it, I think, was a huge success. And to bring down the government, had you anything like, if you hadn't had, say, for example, if you had more time for them to build up some type of joint basis, or indeed if you changed the structure and had moved designation, I think as well, or you were able to remove a party from government, I think, yes, you could have seen them changing the way they could do the way they could do business. Because I think if everybody had been in government at that time, you would have ended up creating some type of civil service report that didn't tell you a great deal about, and indeed, had Ireland maybe stood aside at that point in time, you might have ended up with a senior civil service doing, yes, a bit of a comedy of errors here, but nothing much to see.
Yeah.
You had a range of things. But yes, the opposition bill, what I thought was really exciting about doing it was starting to look and to really delve into what's broken here. And most of the time, our assembly actually functions very, very well. Not a lot of people know this, and comes back to a comment you made at the start. People getting in and talking to each other makes a huge contribution to even building relations. It's much harder to demonize someone that you actually know, or you've sat in committee with, or you've drank a cup of tea or coffee, standing beside, asking about you know, how's your granny's new hip doing or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you have all of those things. And just to focus on the assembly and what Colin McDavid said, where he's absolutely right. Backbench assembly members have a huge amount of power, and probably in legislative terms, more power than an average Westminster backbencher.
Yeah.
Particularly say if you take now where the government is an 80 seat majority. Because if the executive drawn from the dominant party in the House of Commons doesn't want your bill, or indeed doesn't want some clause in your bill, they have the numbers to vote it down. Whereas actually when you're doing stuff in the Northern Ireland Assembly, if you can get one of the big parties on board, it's very hard to stop it. So the opposition stuff was interesting to do, to get funding and to really start to say, where are our blockages here? And most of our blockages are actually in the executive. We need an executive that functions like a government and functions like a collective government. And that's some of my concern. And I still have that concern that we have no collective cabinet responsibility. You know, it's in the Irish constitution that the government will act as a collective. It's, you know, 300 years of Westminster Convention. And we did see it, you know, in the dying days of Theresa May's administration. We did see what happens when collective cabinet government breaks down.
Yeah.
You know, that you've literally chaos as to how to get policy, anything enacted. So, and the problem when I looked at it as a member, one time we'd Simon Hamilton taking Michelle O'Neill, who was Dard Minister, Agriculture Minister at the time, to court over, I think it was rural development funding.
Yeah.
Arlene Foster taking Mark Durkan, the Environment Minister, to court over, I think it was Belfast Metropolitan Plan or something. I might be wrong on what the issue was, but you go, this looks ridiculous. And I remember Peter Robinson using a phrase that the executive's dysfunctional, and nobody batted an eyelid. And I was thinking, right, if his equivalents like Enda Kenny, David Cameron, or Nicola Sturgeon, or you know, Alex Salmond, whoever it was at that time, come out and said my government's dysfunctional, would somebody not go, well, Prime Minister, you really need to go then, you know? But nobody batted an eyelid here. We just sort of accept it's just part of the system. So how do we change that? How do we, you know, and my idea looking that was saying, right, if you and I are going to be in government, you know, I can't be out protesting against what you're doing in health today and you protesting against what I'm doing in education tomorrow. If you're in government, act like you're in government. If you're in opposition, but don't do government or opposition within the government. I just don't think, I think it just creates dysfunction. And things like voting against a budget. And yes, you know, hands up, I was in a party in the government voting against a budget, but I made it clear at times, this isn't where we should be. Yeah. You know, if we're in the government, surely we should be voting, because there's nothing more fundamental to a government than supply. Yeah. And once you start to vote against that, you should not be in the government. I mean, I look at the different times that we had real hope. I remember, and I said this to Peter Robinson one day, my all-time favourite Peter Robinson conference speech was in 2011, where he said, I'm going to end us and them. You know, we're going to end us and them politics. And I remember bumping into him in a voting lobby the next week and going, Peter, that's just the sort of message I want to hear. Like, you keep this up, I'll nearly be joining, you know, nearly to frighten him. And I remember like thinking when I was standing for the leadership of the Ulster Unionist Party, if the DUP's pushing up against the alliance, where's the space for us? But then, you know, 18 months later, or a year after that speech, we had flag protests. We were in a unionist forum, carrying flags about, super prodding it all over the place, and just not in the right space. Instead of setting out an alternative, I would have said to the DUP, then by the following year, the letter from America, and things that, broadly, unionism needs to get its confidence back. It's like, to use that Jimmy Carter phrase, a crisis of confidence more than anything. And that's where it needs to get back, and needs to, I think actually something like the maze could have been a really exciting project to do, with people having a huge interest in going to see it. But the narrative could have been got right, and we could have done things like that, but we just never had the confidence. One of the things I was proud of in NI21 actually said, no, we can do this, we can do this, but it just wasn't worth the political capital needed, at that time. Like in the 9 years I was in MLA, it nearly didn't get started. Then it nearly collapsed over devolving policing and justice, and then the UUP nearly tried to make it collapse over policing and justice. Then by the time we get into my second term, those political talks, right the way through that term, those talks that we could handle this at the start. Then we had Stormont House 1, Stormont House 2, Haas O'Sullivan talks, and like the agreement at Stormont, or New Deal, New Decade, eventually getting to that point. So there's always been challenges, but it's having that will. And I come back to the basis of this. The more normal we make Northern Ireland, the better a place Northern Ireland is to live, the more people want to live and work and stay here, and create a good, prosperous society, and is a great place to live. The more you, oddly, the more secure you can make those who believe in the Union, and the more viable you can make it for those who believe in the United Ireland. So no one wants a basket case. So stop making this place look like a dysfunctional basket case, and make it a good, exciting, prosperous place where people want to live and bring up a family and get on with whatever that family looks like. Get on with their life and stop interfering in that. And the better you can have that debate of staying in the Union or a United Ireland, but making it a basket case, nobody wants to take that on. No. It just happens that the UK's get stuck with it, but actually make this a place, stop making it look like a place apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good place to end it as any. John, thank you very much for speaking to us.